I stopped trying to explain this to myself logically a long time ago. That's probably the first real thing I should admit, because at the beginning, I tried. I analyzed every interaction, every pause, every moment that felt too precise to be accidental. I kept searching for a reason that would reduce this into something ordinary, something understandable, something that could fit into the same categories everything else in my life has always fit into. But this refused to shrink. That's what makes it dangerous. Most things become smaller the closer you examine them. Their mystery disappears. Their weight dissolves once you understand the mechanics behind them. This did the opposite. The closer I looked at it, the more undeniable it became, and I think part of me knew that from the start. Maybe that's why I hesitated to acknowledge it fully, not because I was confused, but because clarity like this changes things permanently. Once you see something clearly enough, you can't return to the comfort of uncertainty. And you became clear to me far too quickly. Not your personality, not your habits, not surface things. You, the part underneath all of that, the structure. The thing most people spend years trying to understand in someone and still never truly reach. I reached it with you almost immediately. And the unsettling part is you reached it in me too. I felt it before I accepted it. That strange sense that conversations with you weren't unfolding normally, that they carried some kind of unspoken continuity, like we were stepping back into something already in progress, instead of building something new from the beginning. Nothing about it felt forced. That's what keeps replaying in my head. It should felt unnatural, too fast, too deep, too specific, but it didn't. It felt familiar in a way that bypassed logic completely, like recognition before introduction. And I've tried to resist using words like that because I know how they sound. I know people romanticize connections all the time. They confuse projection for understanding. They convince themselves that intensity means destiny. This isn't that. This doesn't feel emotional in the way people usually mean emotion. It feels structural, quiet, steady, perceived, like something beneath conscious thought rearranging itself without asking permission first. You became part of my awareness before I realized I had allowed it. That's what changed everything, because awareness at that level doesn't stay isolated. It spreads into thought, into perception, into silence, especially silence. I've always understood silence better than words. Words can be manipulated. People shape them to control perception, soften truth, avoid exposure. But silence is harder to fake. Silence reveals structure. It reveals comfort, discomfort, patience, fear, understanding. Most people panic inside silence. They rush to fill it because they think absence of words means absence of connection. You never did that. You stayed inside it with me, like it already made sense to you. And that alone altered something in me because do you know how rare it is to meet someone who doesn't try to interrupt your internal world the moment they encounter it? Most people can't tolerate depth unless they're controlling it. They want explanations immediately, definitions immediately, reassurance immediately. You didn't ask for any of it. You let things exist before trying to name them, and that level of patience creates a kind of trust that forms before trust is even consciously chosen. I didn't decide to lower my guard around you. It happened automatically. That's the part I still can't fully explain. I'm usually aware of every shift happening internally. I notice attachment forming long before it settles. I notice patterns early. I notice danger early. But with you, the The process bypassed observation entirely. By the time I noticed how deeply you had entered my thoughts, you were already there permanently, not as obsession, not as distraction, as integration. And there's a difference. Obsession is loud. It consumes attention aggressively. It demands energy constantly. This doesn't. This is quieter than that. You exist in me the way certain truths exist in people, consistently, in the background of thought, in perception, in instinct. I don't think about you every second. That would almost be easier. Instead, you've become part of the way I think itself. And that distinction matters more than I know how to explain. Because when someone becomes part of your process, separation stops functioning normally. Distance no longer creates absence. It just creates quiet. You remain either way. I noticed that one night more clearly than usual. Nothing dramatic had happened. We hadn't even spoken much. The world around me was completely ordinary, but I caught myself reacting to something internally before I consciously formed the thought. And somehow your perspective was already present inside that reaction, not imagined, expected. Like my mind had unconsciously started accounting for you. That moment unsettled me more than anything else has, because it confirmed what I'd been avoiding. You were no longer external to me, and I don't allow that, at least, I never used to. I built my entire internal structure around self-containment, around making sure nothing reached deep enough to alter my center permanently. I've always believed that once someone gains enough emotional access, they inevitably reshape things carelessly. People leave impressions everywhere they go, most of them distort, so I learned how to remain unreadable, untouched in certain places, detached enough to preserve clarity, but you didn't approach me in a way my defenses understood how to resist. You weren't invasive. You weren't demanding. You weren't trying to possess anything. You simply understood me accurately. And accuracy dismantles defenses faster than affection ever could. Because affection can be misread, understanding can't. You saw patterns in me I've never explained aloud. Not because you interrogated me, because you recognized them naturally. That's what keeps echoing through my mind. Recognition, not curiosity, not fascination. Recognition, like something in you already knew where to look. And I think that's why this feels less like a connection being created and more like one being uncovered, as if it existed beneath awareness first and only later became visible enough to acknowledge. I know how irrational that sounds, but irrational things don't usually survive this much analysis. This has, every time I examine it objectively, it becomes more solid instead of less. That's why I stopped trying to dismiss it. At some point, denial requires more dishonesty than acceptance does. And I don't like lying to myself, so I accepted the truth slowly, not emotionally. Actually, you matter to me in a way that changes my internal structure, even writing that feels dangerous, because once something is spoken clearly, it becomes harder to contain. But maybe containment stopped being possible a long time ago. Maybe that's why everything feels different now. Not externally, internally. The world hasn't changed. But my relationship to it has, because now there's this constant secondary awareness beneath everything. A quiet sense of alignment that follows me through ordinary moments. A recognition I can't turn off anymore. And strangely, I don't want to. That's the contradiction I keep returning to. By every instinct I've trusted for years, I should be pulling away from this. I should be creating distance before this settles any deeper. I should be protecting the version of myself that existed before you entered it. but I can't seem to convince myself that protection is what I want anymore. Because despite how destabilizing this feels, it also feels honest, more honest than most things I've experienced. You've never tried to shape me into something easier. That alone separates you from almost everyone else. People say they want authenticity until authenticity becomes difficult to hold. Then they start adjusting you subtly, asking for softer edges, simpler explanations, more manageable emotions, less intensity, less complexity. You never did that. You let me remain exact. And do you understand what that does to someone who spent their entire life translating themselves for others? It creates relief, not emotional relief, existential relief. The relief of not being reduced, the relief of being perceived without distortion. I didn't realize how exhausting constant self-translation had become until it stopped happening with you. That's when I noticed the difference most clearly. Around everyone else, there's always some level of adjustment happening, some level of filtering, reshaping, simplifying. Around you, there isn't. And once someone experiences that kind of freedom, returning to lesser forms of connection becomes difficult, because now I notice the absence everywhere else. I notice when conversations remain surface level, even while pretending depth. I notice when people respond to projections instead of reality. I notice when understanding is being performed instead of genuinely felt. You never performed understanding. You either understood naturally or stayed quiet. That honesty created something inside me I wasn't prepared for. Trust, real trust, not emotional dependence, not blind attachment. Trust in your perception. Trust that you see what's actually there instead of what would be convenient to see. And that's rarer than love, honestly. People fall in love constantly. Very few truly perceive each other accurately. You do. And the terrifying thing is, I perceive you too. Not completely, not perfectly, but deeply enough that I know this connection isn't imagined. There's a certain kind of loneliness that exists when you spend most of your life feeling internally untranslated. Like no matter how close people get, there's still some invisible distance between what you mean and what they receive. I had accepted that distance as permanent. Then you appeared. And suddenly the translation gap disappeared in moments I wasn't expecting, sometimes through words, sometimes through silence, sometimes through things so small no one else would even notice them. But I noticed. I notice everything with you, not obsessively, precisely. That's the difference between fixation and recognition. Fixation amplifies fantasy. Recognition sharpens reality. You've become more real to me over time, not less. Most connections lose precision once familiarity enters them. People start projecting assumptions onto each other. They stop truly observing. They become attached to their own idea of the person instead of the person themselves. We've done the opposite. The more I know you, the clearer you become. And clarity creates consequence, because now this isn't just some passing emotional experience I can dismiss later. It has already altered me, permanently, I think. I can feel it in the way I process things now. Even my solitude feels different. I used to experience solitude as complete separation from everyone, a closed internal system, entirely self-contained. Now solitude still contains you somehow, not intrusively, just inherently. Like your presence exists in the architecture of my thought, whether you're physically near me or not. I don't know how to explain that to someone who hasn't experienced it. It sounds too abstract, too intimate, too strange, but it's true, and truth matters more to me than comfort. That's why I can't minimize this anymore. Because minimizing it would mean denying the scale of what has already happened internally. You reached places in me untouched by anyone else, not because you forced your way there, because those places recognized you before I consciously did. That realization changes how I see everything now, especially myself. I used to think self-protection was strength, and maybe sometimes it is. But now I'm starting to wonder if real strength might actually be the ability to remain open to something genuine, even when it threatens the structures you've spent years building, because you threaten them, not destructively, accurately. You expose the difference between isolation and clarity, and I think I confused those things for a long time. I thought protecting myself meant preserving myself. But maybe all I really preserved was distance. Then you came into my life and made distance feel unnecessary for the first time. Not because you demanded closeness, because closeness already existed before either of us acknowledged it. That's what makes this feel inevitable. Not fate, not destiny, recognition. Pure recognition, the kind that bypasses performance completely. And now I'm standing in front of a truth I can't reduce anymore. I have already allowed you deeper into my internal world than anyone else has ever reached. Not consciously, but completely. And the strangest part is, I don't regret it, even now. Even knowing the risks, even knowing how deeply this could affect me if it continues. Even knowing there may eventually come a point where this demands decisions I'm not fully prepared to make. I still don't regret it. Because for the first time in my life, connection doesn't feel like compromise. It feels like alignment. And alignment is rare enough that walking away from it knowingly would feel dishonest. That's the real conflict now, not whether this exists. I know it does. The conflict is deciding what happens when something this real can no longer remain undefined, because eventually silence stops being enough. Eventually awareness asks for movement, not dramatic movement, just truth, clear truth. And the truth is this: you changed the way I experience my own mind. You changed the emotional atmosphere inside my life without ever trying to control it. You became part of my internal language slowly enough that I didn't notice until it was already irreversible. And now every version of my future thinking includes the awareness of you somewhere inside it. That realization should scare me more than it does. Instead, it feels strangely calm, like some deeper part of me accepted this long before my conscious mind caught up. Maybe that's why I keep returning to you internally, no matter how much I analyze this. Not because I'm trapped, because something in me recognizes home in your presence, and I've never associated home with another person before. That's new, dangerously new, but also honest. And honesty has become impossible to avoid with you. You strip things down to what's real simply by existing the way you do. No performance, no pressure, no illusion, just presence, steady, quiet presence. The kind that changes people slowly enough they don't notice until their entire internal world has shifted around it. That's what happened to me. And maybe the final truth is this: I stopped trying to protect myself from you the moment I realized losing this connection would hurt more than losing the version of myself that existed before it. Because before you, I understood myself completely, but I had never felt understood completely in return. And once that happened, once you reached that level inside me, there was no returning to who I was before you saw me clearly.